Welcome back to the DIY section of the course, and in this module we're going to be going through how to go from tracking macros or calories or just tracking your food in general to mindful eating. It's a really beautiful step in your journey. You should be so proud of yourself for getting here, and we're going to walk you through every step of the way. So going from tracking your food to mindful eating is actually a more difficult step than I think a lot of people give it credit for. A lot of us tend to think, oh, I tracked all this time, like I kind of know what everything looks like in my head, like I could just like toss the app out and be fine. And there are some people who are able to manage that, but what I've seen in practice over the past decade of coaching women online is that a graded, gradual approach works a lot better for cultivating the self-trust and the confidence to truly do this long term compared to just ditching MyFitnessPal cold turkey. The problem is not in the actual knowledge. It's in the second guessing, it's in the self-trust, and it's in the confidence that when you loosen the reins, things don't fall apart. Because if you think about it, you've spent all this time really relying on data and using data to reassure you of a lot of things. And so when we are taking this process of tapering off of tracking, we still need reassurance in other ways. And we only learn how to build in that reassurance and that self-trust if we do it gradually. If we strip it all together, we often end up questioning things, second guessing ourselves, and a lot of times falling into that all or nothing thinking of, well, what's the point if I don't know if I'm doing any of this right? So just remember, the transition from tracking macros to intuitive eating is a more mental transformation than it is a tactical or a physical one. Actually, a lot of it has to do with how you have learned how to track macros, your mindset around that as a whole. And this is really going to reveal a lot to you about maybe where have your holes been in tracking in the first place. Not a bad thing, just feedback and something to learn from. So let's take you through the step-by-step. Step one is to reach your goals first. I know that sounds kind of silly, but a lot of people like to try to jump to this module thinking that I'm tired of tracking, I'm just going to intuitively eat and reach my goals that way. And the truth of the matter is there is no better way to reach your goals than by having measurables and macros and things to actually measure in place. And if you are feeling that way, if you're watching this because you're looking for an out from tracking, then I would encourage continuing to watch this because this is showing you a hole in how you're approaching tracking macros. If tracking feels dogmatic, if it feels exhausting, if it feels like too much work, that is actually a sign that we're not approaching it truly in a balanced way, and that we're still holding too much perfectionism, too much all or nothing thinking over the process of tracking. And we actually need to work on that first to have a more balanced approach with mindful eating when we wean off. In addition, there's just a tactical knowledge that you need to have of how much food your body actually needs after a fat loss phase in a reverse diet, in maintenance. You need to go through these other steps first to actually know, what does that look like in terms of amount of food, what's on your plate, how full you feel after these meals. Because if you're in the middle of a fat loss phase right now and you're struggling with hitting your deficit numbers, or you want to intuitively hit a deficit, that's great. And maybe you can continue that for some time. But when it comes to maintaining your progress, you're not gonna know what a larger amount of food looks like for your body that's appropriate for you to maintain your progress. So please, please, please reach your goals first. And if you are somebody who is looking for that out, who is struggling with tracking, go reach out to your coach right now that I called you out on this video, and that you need more help looking at tracking in a more holistic and balanced way. Step two, after you've reached your goals, the most important thing to remember in this transition is that it is a step-by-step process, like a staircase, not a band-aid to rip off. So the first thing that you can start doing, which honestly a lot of times when we coach you through this is gonna start happening in the reverse dieting phase anyways, is incorporating at least 1 to 2 untracked meals per week. What I recommend is do whatever feels the most comfortable for you first, right? If you're worried about ruining your progress, then have that untracked meal just be a regular breakfast or lunch that you eat from home, and maybe you just throw it together and eyeball it instead of weighing everything out and putting it in MyFitnessPal, and then you go about the rest of your day as normal. Then from there, you can bridge into going out to eat and estimating and not having to worry about tracking it or logging it, but trusting the cues that you have built along the way. When we track our food, we are doing it to learn what our meals should look like, but we can't forget to reflect upon how does that meal make us feel in terms of fullness, satiety, digestion, energy. And if we're not paying attention to how our food actually influences our body and how we feel, then we're going to be missing cues for later when we wean off of tracking, because those are the cues that we need to rely on. So when you wean off of having that untracked meal, in or out of the house, and you start to incorporate that more often, the questions we should be asking ourselves instead is, how full do I typically feel after this kind of a meal? And did the amount that I ate in this intuitive or untracked meal match that? Do I feel similarly? Or do I feel heavier or more bloated or full? Do I feel like I didn't eat enough? and tuning back into trusting your body and the signals that it's giving you. This is another reason why it's important to wait until after a reverse diet to go through this process, because if you're doing this in a reverse diet, your body will physiologically feel hungrier for longer and won't get full at the time that it's supposed to, and will drive you to overeat. Step 3 is weaning off of tracking altogether, or to the largest degree that you feel comfortable with. And this is just a reminder that this is a continuum. It's a sliding scale. It's not a black and white, rip the band-aid off and never return to it again. Tracking is always a tool that can be there for you. And again, if you are coming into this video feeling like you want to get away from tracking and you never want to touch it again, then there's a problem with the way you're looking at tracking as a whole. You want to look at it in the long run as a helpful tool where maybe once a month, maybe once every couple weeks, you log a full day of eating and you ask yourself, is this kind of representative of where I want to be right now? And if so, great, your intuitive habits are reflective of that, or it's feedback to say, oh wow, my protein really dropped off, or my fiber really dropped off. Let me intentionally work on getting that back with a couple more days of tracking, and then I'll wean off again. That's a kind of relationship you want to have in the long run, because unfortunately we live in an obesogenic environment, meaning that if we go completely unchecked with our food intake, most people will gain weight over the course of time. That's the environment we live in. It's working against us, and that is a truth and a reality that we do need to accept. So again, the timeline for weaning off of tracking is going to be dependent on you, your comfort level, and the level of trust that you have with yourself. So what I like to say is take it slow. It's typically a couple months worth of a journey where you're weaning off of maybe a couple of untracked meals. And then eventually that becomes a couple of untracked days. And then eventually that becomes a few untracked days to where maybe the untracked days outweigh the tracked days in your week, right? It's 4 to 3 or 5 to 2. And we've done this very systematically with clients in the past where we truly do wean them off of tracking almost altogether, one day at a time over the course of many weeks. And it's very important to keep either a weekly check-in or something like a weekly check-in with yourself as you're going through this process to put a pattern interrupt in between. Okay, this week I did 5 days untracked and 2 days tracked. How did that go? What were my wins? What were my struggles? Where were my challenges? This week, should I taper that more to 6 days and 1? Or should I stay at the 5 and 2 for a little bit longer just to see how things continue to maintain? And again, making sure you're monitoring weight maintenance, body composition, and things like that over the course of time as you're weaning off too, to make sure those stay stable as you get away from tracking. So when you're in this process, just try to avoid assigning this really strict and rigid timeline to yourself of how long it should take. Be patient, give yourself grace, and recalibrate your expectations for the process very, very often. And remember that taking a long time with this is not a bad thing. This is a transition that should lead you into a lifetime of healthy habits, weight maintenance, and knowing when to reel things in and when to let things go. So the question that I always like to ask is, what's a couple more weeks or maybe 1 or 2 more months if it leads to a lifetime of success? Don't rush the process here. I know you're close to the end and you want to sprint, but keep that slow pace because it's going to be worth it in the end. And lastly, just remember that the goal is not always to get rid of tracking forever, but it's to have a relationship with it where it's a tool that you can come back to, but not something that you depend on. And that looks different for everyone. Some people keep a little bit of tracking in their life for good. Some people ditch it altogether, but most people stay somewhere in the gray area in between. And I encourage you to look at it that way moving forward for your future so that you know you have that accountability built in, you have those checks and balances built in, and you can live a lifestyle where you can give yourself that reassurance as needed and be able to have the balance that you want. Thanks for watching. Go to your coach with any questions, concerns, or reflections off of this module, and we'll see you in the next one.